Welcome to the Radically Genuine podcast. I am Dr. Roger McFillin. In a world inundated with diagnoses and labels, and let's face it, there's a lot of them. They can range from a psychiatric diagnosis somebody has, to the color of their skin, to their religion, to their political affiliation. Have we lost touch with the essence of the human experience? Our society is struggling with an unprecedented surge in mental health related issues. Yet we must ask, are we truly facing an epidemic of illness? Or have we pathologized the very nature of being human? At what point did the struggles of everyday life morph into symptoms requiring medical intervention? We live in an era where the language of psychiatry dominates our understanding of the mind. But has this medicalization of our inner worlds enhanced our well-being? Or has it stripped us of our ability to find meaning in our pain? Have we sacrificed our collective wisdom on navigating life's challenges at the altar of the illusion of quick fixes and pill bottles? As mental health labels proliferate, do they illuminate our understanding of the human condition? Or do they cast long shadows, obscuring the rich tapestry of human emotion and experience? Are we witnessing the rise of genuine disorders or the clever marketing of human suffering as a commodity? In our quest for normalcy, have we narrowed the bandwidth of acceptable human behavior to the point where any deviation is seen as pathological? And in doing so, have we inadvertently created a society less capable of resilience, empathy, and meaningful human connection? What forces drive this paradigm? Is it born out of genuine concern for human welfare, or is there more insidious motivations at play? Political control, profit, the suppression of dissent, the normalization of conformity? As we stand at the crossroads, we must ask ourselves, what is the true cost of viewing the human experience through the lens of a disorder, or a label for that matter? And more importantly, how can we reclaim our narrative, find meaning in our struggles, and rediscover the transformative power of human resilience? To have this discussion and more, our guest today is Dr. Eric Maisel, who's a psychotherapist, a coach, teacher, and an author of more than 50 books. They include Rethinking Depression, How to Shed Mental Health Labels and Create Personal Meaning, which was published in 2012. The Future of Mental Health, Deconstructing the Mental Disorder Paradigm in 2015. And his most recent book, Redesign Your Mind, published in 2021. His contributions are diverse and vast. His interests include creativity, the creative life, the profession of creativity coaching, which he founded, issues of life purpose and meaning, mental health and critical psychology, and parenting in a quote-unquote mental disorder age. I've recently been exposed to his work and find him to be a critical thinker in an age where most in the mental health field are regurgitating the same tired platitudes as our collective well-being worsens and the mental health outcomes of standard care are clearly and measurably worsening those who choose such a path. Dr. Eric Maisel, I want to welcome you to the Radically Genuine podcast.
Thank you so much, Roger. I think the introduction said it all, so I think we're done.
That's just the tip of the iceberg here. We have to really go underneath what's beneath the water. You know, what's that foundation? And those are the critical questions that we have to ask. And we have to get people to critically examine and think again about our lives. I mean, it's so easy to become habitual and automatic thinkers. If I have your age correct, I believe you're 77 years old.
That is exactly correct.
Okay. You do have a Wikipedia page, so I was able to get your age. There's an old saying that dates back, I think it's like an actual Chinese curse, is may you live in interesting times.
Indeed.
And I think you have lived in interesting times and certainly been exposed to a, I guess, shifting cultural landscape on humans' understanding of the experience and the pain and struggles of living. So I'm curious to get your perspective on, how the communication of emotional struggles has shifted over the course of your lifetime.
Way back when, in the early 1900s, the British language analysis professors were really smart about how language works. Philosophy moved in an interesting direction back then, from arcane wonders about metaphysical things to exactly how language works. Bertrand Russell is one of the folks from that era, Wittgenstein. There are a whole slew of them who would ask questions like, if you call a horse's tail a leg, does a horse have 5 legs? Just how does language work, and how does language enter the mind? And then Orwell came along and started or continued that thought pattern, that trend, wondering aloud about what happens if the government says war is peace and peace is war and everyone's equal except the pigs are more important and all of that. So those were my early influences. I thought I was in math and physics growing up. I thought I was a little science boy. I went to a math and science high school, started out in college in physics, but actually kind of understood that none of that interested me, never had exactly interested me, except maybe the bigness of numbers. I liked how far apart stars were and just the bigness of numbers, but human things interested me more than hard science. And way back when, growing up, I was already that kid who was pointing a finger and wondering why the emperor who had no clothes was thought to be clothed. I grew up in a Jewish and Italian neighborhood in Old Brooklyn. I did not understand why on Fridays the Jews would go to synagogue and why on Sunday the Italians would go to church. I already thought that religion made no sense and that gods were made up. That struck me at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And I also thought one of the threads in my life is authoritarianism. I thought that all of my friends' dads were authoritarians. I was happy not to have a father. I felt blessed in not having a father. When I was young, I read Sartre's Les Mots, his autobiography, in which he remarked that he was happy that he'd never had a dad laying full length on him. He had the same sentiment that I had. And so that was one of the threads that's always interested me. I just had a book come out called Parents Who Bully, about authoritarians in the family. Authoritarians in public life have been looked at a bit. That was an important literature from the 1950s. Theodore Adorno and researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, tried to figure out not who Hitler was, but who Hitler's followers were, who those sheep were, if they were sheep, or if they were just mini tyrants, or who they were. And a big authoritarian personality literature grew up. But no one ever quite looked at authoritarians in the family, what it's like to be bullied by a father or a mother or a sibling. So that's always been an area of interest to me. And then to circle all the way to the thing that we're probably most likely to talk about the most, my mom had 3 sisters. My mom was a solid person. And one of the aunts, Aunt Rose, was a solid person, let's call her. And then the other 2 aunts had lots of, nowadays they'd be called mental health problems, whatever we'd want to call them, but they'd be called mental health problems. And one of the aunts was institutionalized in Rockland State Mental Hospital, which is north of New York City. I was growing up in New York. And I'd go with my grandfather. I was a little kid, probably 5, to Rockland State Institution to visit Aunt Anne. And so that was an early experience for me of just that notion of difference and also sympathy for that person, because that's who my grandfather was. He would bring her, this sounds a bit grotesque, but he would bring a newly killed chicken from the chicken market. And I don't know what he thought that anybody at the institution was going to do with a newly plucked chicken, but that was his offering. He was coming to say, I still love you and hope you get better and all of that. My brother ended up doing his PhD at Yale in sociology, and his dissertation was on recidivism rate at mental institutions. That is, it's been a sort of a family business to think about these things. And I don't know where to land exactly, but I understood very early on that what was going on, maybe it was at the beginning of my therapy training. In the first courses, I began to understand that what I was being told made no sense to me. That diagnosing on the basis of symptoms or symptom pictures made no sense to me. That's not the way medicine works. Medicine's interested in what's causing something, not just how something looks. In medicine, if you come in with a rash, it's not okay to just call it rashitis and be done with it, as if that's an answer to the question. So something about it made no sense to me. And let me just say parenthetically that I also noticed that all of my fellow students were incurious. They didn't seem to be hearing the weirdness of what was being told to them. They were just making notes and answering questions for tests. And you can see how a professional class arises if no one is questioning what they're being told at the student level. If they're just taking it in. If someone says, here's the DSM picture of X and here's the DSM picture of Y, and you need to be able to make a differential diagnosis or whatever, and they're just nodding, not taking the meta step back and wondering, what's this document? What is the DSM? What is the ICD? What are these things? What are they trying to sell or tell me? So very early on, I didn't believe in the pseudo-medical model of mental disorder diagnosing. I didn't believe in it. Got my license, did that work for a while as a therapist, but I knew I was going to segue out of therapy soon, because I did not believe I was diagnosing mental disorders. I believed I was just dealing with folks who had problems with living and sort of ordinary things that should not have been put into some other category with labels like clinical depression or schizophrenia or what have you.
Can I ask you a question? What happened to your father?
That's a long and interesting story. The fellow whose name I have, Maisel, actually died many years before I was born. So I'm not a Maisel, but I wear that name because that's what the name my mom put on my birth certificate, or had put on my birth certificate. She had an affair with an interesting guy who was married, and he was sort of big in New York politics, and they had a tempestuous affair, except he also was an untrustworthy type. He gambled away a lot of her money. She didn't have much money, but what she had, he gambled away at the racetracks, at Aqueduct or one of those New York racetracks. So she kicked him out, essentially, out of her life. I met him once when I was 13, but I didn't know who he was. He showed up one day. My mom had decided I needed to learn how to shave, and that I needed a man in my life at least for a day. So apparently she could be in touch with him, and she invited him over, and he watched. I was already shaving. He watched me shave. He said, okay, and he left, and that's my entire connection to my dad. What's interesting, though, apart from just that story, is that he was an immigrant, one of these Russian or Polish Jewish immigrants who made his way across the universe, London and Cuba and here and there, and made it to this country. But in the 1920s, he had a book published, which is really amazing for a recent immigrant to have a kind of eloquent book published on practical political politics, ward politics, how to get things done at the ward level. So I have, I guess, this is a joke, I hope no one will take it seriously, some genetic connection to political activism and individualism, and just trying to, my life purpose statement for myself is do the next right thing. That's works for me. And that's kind of a stance. I think if all people just took that simple life purpose statement and lived it, we'd be doing a lot better. But that's the story of my father. I think he was an interesting, probably difficult and dark-ish figure, but I didn't know him.
When did you learn about him? When were you told about the relationship your mother had to him?
I honestly don't remember, but I suspect it was connected to a time when she was worried about me. Namely, I had enlisted in the Army in 1965, which would have made me 18, and that was not a brilliant time during the Vietnam War to decide to enlist. There were other things one might have thought to do than enlist, but I suspect that we maybe had some conversations when I was on leave or something like that, where she wanted me to know my heritage or that story, just in case I didn't survive my time in the Army.